Chapter 4, Chapter 5 talk about chemical bonding, and Chapter 4 is about the ionic bond model. What is a chemical bond? It may sound like a mysterious concept. However, it is nothing more than an attractive force between two atoms. It is a force that holds two atoms together. Why? How come there is an attractive force between two atoms then? Well, no surprise. It is formed as a result of the interaction between the electrons between the two atoms. No surprise. Remember, electrons are troublemaker. There are actually two kinds of chemical bonds. One is called an ionic bond. The other is called a covalent bond. Covalent bonds will be the topic of next chapter. Ionic bond. Ionic bond is formed through the transfer of electrons from one atom or group of atoms to another atom or group of atoms. Well, let's ignore the part that is talking about group of atoms. We're going to talk about this at the end of this chapter. Let's focus on the atom. So basically, this one is telling us when electrons are transferred from one atom to another, there will be an attractive force generated between the two, and we call that attractive force ionic bond. Why? How? Why, when electrons are transferred, an attractive force will be generated between the two atoms? So let's take a deeper look at it. I'm going to draw two atoms here. One is, I call it atom A, one I call it atom B. They're both neutral. Let's see what happens when one electron is transferred from A to B. One electron is transferred from A to B. An electron carries a negative charge. I'm going to label it out here. So A, B both were neutral before. Now a particle that carries a negative charge is transferred from A to B. As a result, now A is going to carry a positive charge because it lost a negative charge. And B now is going to carry a negative charge because it gets a particle that carries a negative charge. Now the two particles carries opposite charges and they will attract each other. Does that make sense to you? This attractive force is called ionic bond. Why do we call it an ionic bond then? Well, charged particles, charged atoms are called ions. Then the attractive force between charged particles is called an ionic bond. Ionic compound. If in a compound particles are held together through ionic bonds, then that compound is called an ionic compound. Ionic compounds usually have high melting points. Ionic compounds usually are good conductors of electricity when they're in molten state or when they are dissolved in water solution. Covalent bond. Covalent bond will be the topic of the next chapter. We'll just go through some of the basics about covalent bonds briefly. So covalent bond is formed through the sharing of one or more pairs of electrons between two atoms. How? What's going on? We'll discuss about that later, okay, in the next chapter. A covalent bond is formed through the sharing of electrons. ionic bond is formed through the transfer of electrons. Compounds in which covalent bonds are present are called covalent compound or molecular compound. Molecular compound and covalent compound are equivalent. They're talking about the same thing, two different names of the same kind of compound. Covalent compounds tend to be gases, liquids, or solids with low melting points. They do not conduct electricity in their molten states. Although we just defined two kinds of chemical bonds, ionic and covalent, however, let's make it clear. Most chemical bonds are neither 100% ionic nor 100% covalent. Electrons in most chemical bonds are not transferred completely or shared equally. Two fundamental concepts about electrons and chemical bonding. Number one, not all electrons in an atom participate in chemical bonding. Those that do participate are called valence electrons. All right, valence electrons are electrons that are involved in chemical bonding. For representative elements and the noble gases, elements in the A groups from 1A through 8A, valence electrons are the electrons in their outermost shell. Oh, that makes sense. We have been emphasizing the outermost shell electrons ever since we started talking about electrons. Be clear. The definition of valence electrons are the electrons that are involved in chemical bonding. Many times you will hear people say that valence electrons are the electrons in the outermost shell of an atom. This statement is only true for a limited amount of elements. Most of the times it's for the A groups, elements in the A groups. This statement is true. However, in our class, we focus on those elements. So many times you will hear me say that valence electrons are the electrons in the outermost shell of atoms. Keep in mind that statement is only true for a limited amount of elements. Number two, certain arrangements of electrons are more stable than others as explained by the octet rule. Well, this statement doesn't tell us anything other than there is a rule that is called octet rule, and that rule tells us certain arrangements of electrons are more stable than others. Nothing more than that. We know nothing more than that from this statement. Don't worry, octet rule will be our next topic.